I have been thinking a lot about video game pricing recently. There's been a lot of talk about games being too expensive and people being priced out of the hobby, to Microsoft raising, then lowering the price of Game Pass and trying to put Outer Worlds at $80, to Nintendo launching Mario Kart World at $80, and the possibility and rumors of GTA 6 being $100. There's just a lot of things pointing to games being too expensive and that it isn't sustainable. People running into the streets saying video games are over and that the world is going to end. The world will end next week! Spend your children's college fund! Thaw that turkey now! Okay, maybe not that far, but people are really upset about the price of video games and video game hardware currently. So I decided to look into it and see if the gaming hobby really is pricing people out and offering less for your money than the past. What I discovered might surprise you. In fact, what if I told you what I found is that video games are cheaper than ever? Most games have more content than ever, and there are more ways to play video games in an affordable manner than ever. I realize it is a bold claim, so let me show you why this is true, even though it necessarily doesn't feel like it. Oh, and before I continue, when I refer to dollar amounts or income, this is in freedom bucks, as I live in the USA, and I feel that is where most of this complaining is coming from.
We're here to bring the free market's liberation to the people of Arcadia.
I know the Australians and you silly Canucks have been getting shafted when it comes to the price of video games for decades, but this is a brand new feeling for most of us Americans. Anyway, let's get into it. We are all aware that wages for the most part have not kept up with inflation over the past 30 years, especially post-COVID, where a decade of wage growth was ruined over the course of just 2 short years. However, what wages have done is kick the ever-loving shit out of video game pricing. Looking at video game prices in early 1994, Super Nintendo games were priced anywhere from $60 to $90. For a new release. Sega Genesis games for a new release were $60 to $80, with some premier games like Virtua Racing reaching as high as $100. In today's money, that would be $131 to $218 per game. Meanwhile, the median household income in 1994 was $32,264, or just under $70,000 in today's money. As for what the median household income is today, actually, $83,730. In short, relative to the 90s, video games have gotten significantly cheaper. But what I hear you say is, Bronson, the 90s were the good old days. The economy didn't really downturn until the 2000s. PS2, Xbox, and GameCube games were only $50. Which is true, except in today's money, that $50 in, say, 2004 is still $85.17 in today's money, which is $5 to $15 more than current AAA titles. And the median income in 2004 for a household was $45,817, or $80,294 in today's money, which is also lower than today's median income by over $3,000. So the 2000s were certainly better than the 90s, but still not cheaper than they are today. So, the 2000s squared away, let's move ahead 10 more years and see how things were in 2014. In 2014, a new AAA video game was $60 in most cases, or a whopping $82 in 2025 money. As for wages, once again, they don't fare much better than today at a median household income of $53,657, or $73,430 in today's money. Yeah, wages totally have not kept up with inflation over the past 30 years, but the price of video games adjusted for inflation have, in most cases, gotten significantly cheaper, or stayed entirely flat, depending on how far you want to go back. I know that some of you will say, hey, but games back then were longer or more feature complete, DLC didn't exist, and so they were better value for the money. Well, I kind of want to get into that, because it's not entirely true. I realize that saying video games are longer than ever currently is a very bold claim, It is also one that is hard to measure, but if there's a will, there's a way. And for video games, that way is a website called howlongtobeat.com, a website where gamers can go report how long it took them to beat the main story of a game, or the main story plus extras, or 200% a game. I'm going to take that and use it to measure the length of games from way back in the 90s all the way to today with some long-running franchises. Now, to start, I want to look at The Legend of Zelda. It's been a very popular franchise since its inception, and I want to take a look at certain games in the franchise and compare them to their more modern incarnations to see what has more content in our longer games. The Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past, released in 1992 and took roughly 17 hours to beat and do most of the side content. Fast forward to 2003 with Zelda: The Wind Waker, which took 35 hours to beat and do the main story and a good amount of side content. 2012, Skyward Sword, that number goes up to 46. And finally in the 2020s, we have Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom, which just to finish the main story with no extras is 59 hours of content. But hey, Zelda's a big RPG. Maybe let's look at something a little more scaled back. How about Mario? 3D Mario games are actually in a very similar place, where Mario 64 and Mario Sunshine were released in 1996 and 2002. Both took roughly 20 hours to 100%, versus Mario Odyssey, which was released in 2017 and takes 62 hours to 100%. Now, you may say that is just Nintendo. They generally are a little more old school, and until recently have been more value-oriented, which I say, fine. Let's look at another long-running franchise like Persona. Persona 1 came out in 1996 and took roughly 51 hours to complete and do a good amount of extra content. Then, Persona 3 in 2007, that hour count balloons to 96 hours. Finally, Persona 5 in 2017 clocks in 113 hours from main story content and extras. This trend repeats for pretty much every single long-running gaming franchise. At worst, you'll have a situation like Halo, where every main game in the franchise hovers around 8 to 10 hours, and then, or Resident Evil, where you'll have outliers, but generally every game in the franchise is longer than their 90s counterpart. Then you have the fact that games just generally have more modes now that have gotten added over time, or franchises have added online features or New Game Plus. You'll have forever games like Cyberpunk and Baldur's Gate 3 that keep getting free updates and post-release content. So yes, in general, AAA games offer more content for your $60 to $80 than at any other point in gaming history, even when factoring in now there is typically paid DLC for additional content, even in single-player games. This doesn't even account for changes like the addition of online play, online modes and leaderboards, or anything in this next section where you can get a whole lot of game for little to no money. Video games have changed a lot beyond pricing and amount of content over the past 30 years. In fact, over the past 20 years or so, games have changed in a massive fashion that has opened up video games to more people for less money than ever before. The first big one is, of course, free-to-play games. There are so many different games in tons of different genres that you can start playing and play for hundreds of hours without spending a penny. Multiplayer games like 2XKO, Marvel Rivals, Dota 2, Team Fortress 2, Delta Force, Counter-Strike, PUBG, Hearthstone, Fortnite. If you're willing to put on a hazmat suit and brave the most toxic environment known to man, you can play League of Legends. All of these offer tens and sometimes hundreds of hours of gameplay for the low price of nothing but your email address. Hell, even if you do spend money, a lot of the time you can get away with spending very little, but still outfit yourself with a ton of really cool stuff. Just talking about me personally, one of my favorite free-to-play games is Marvel Rivals. If you were to have just bought the Battle Pass from the first 3 seasons, you would have a skin for almost every character that is charming as hell and would have only spent $30. Note, this is a game that I have almost 400 hours in just this year alone. Now, I realize those are all PvP games, but what about single player or games with a co-op focus? My response to you would be go check out Guild Wars 2, Path of Exile, Warframe, Lost Ark, Elder Scrolls Online, or Alien Swarm. And if you aren't like me and have the ability to resist the urge of the big Gamba Gotcha slot machine, then Wuthering Waves, Genshin Impact, Honkai Star Rail, Zenless Zone Zero, Persona 5 The Phantom X, Yoramasame Pretty Derby, and Infinity Nikki are all games with a primarily single-player or co-op focus that you can get hundreds of hours of gameplay from without spending a dime. The free-to-play game is one of the best tools in gaming to play great games for little to no money. But it isn't the only way. You have more traditional live service games where if you can ignore or just don't care about battle passes or microtransactions and just want to play a fun game, you can get hundreds of hours out of $40 to $70. I have not paid a penny for Battlefield 6 beyond the purchase price, and I put 60 hours into that game in 1 month. Then you have games like World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy XIV. While they require a subscription, they provide more than enough value for it. For $15 a month, you can literally treat those games as second jobs and still have too much to play. With all that said, maybe live service isn't your thing, and you don't want a never-ending video game that will eventually become a never-ending chore list. Maybe you're like me and will fall victim to the Gotcha Gamba Casino, going broke rolling for waifus. Maybe you want something with a little more love and care put in than your standard AAA game. Or maybe you just want an old school experience with little to no microtransactions, something you can enjoy offline or with friends without spending the full $70 to $80. Well, in this next section, I have something for you that I'm sure you're going to love. Indie games. Indie games are the solution for you. They are normally well under $70, costing $10 on the low end and $50 on the high end. They typically have little to no microtransactions. Many can be enjoyed without the internet, and pretty much all of them have a lot more heart than most of what AAA puts out. In 2025 alone, 55 of the top 100 highest rated games on Metacritic were indie games, most of which don't get near the amount of recognition or praise that they deserve. Instead, a lot of people see that those games will rock pixel art or don't cost the total GDP of some small countries to make, and they will instantly look the other way. But I say no! Why spend $70 to $100 to be disappointed by Assassin's Creed Shadows when you can get an amazing action RPG like Hades 2 for $30? Why spend $70 to $130 on Borderlands 4 when Ball X Pit is $15 and every bit as fun, if not more so, and unlike Borderlands 4, it doesn't crash constantly? Why spend $70 on Avowed when for $50 you can get a far better RPG like Expedition 33? Hell, for the price of one AAA disappointment like Assassin's Creed Shadows, you can buy Balatro, Ball X Pit, Vampire Survivors, and Sea of Stars. You would get way more gameplay for your dollar that have way more love, care, and attention to detail put into them by teams who want to make something cool, with the added benefit of your money not going to evil as fuck companies like Microsoft, Ubisoft, or Take-Two Interactive. Then you have a huge plus of all of these indie games, which is they can run on potato computers.
Hi. So, how are you holding up? Because I'm a potato. Oh, good. My slow clap processor made it into this thing. So we have that.
Or older consoles. I mean, you don't need to have the latest PC parts or even a newer console to play them. Which brings me to my next point on how video games are more affordable than ever. In the before times of the 1990s, 2000s, and to a lesser extent the 2010s, you had to swap out gaming hardware pretty often. Most consoles existed on a 5 to 6 year cycle, so PS1 would come out in 1995, PS2 would come out in 2000, PS3 2006, Super Nintendo 91, N64 96, GameCube 2001, Wii 06. Not only that, it was a pretty hard swap for games. Once the new consoles were out, Development for the old ones stopped in regards to most AAA games. Yes, you would get cases like Twilight Princess coming out on GameCube as well as Wii, or a game like Kirby's Adventure coming out on the NES 2 years into the Super Nintendo's life, but those were exceptions, not the rule. You weren't going to get a PS1 version of Final Fantasy X or Tekken Tag Tournament. You weren't going to get a PS2 version of Resistance Fall of Man. Today, neither of those things are the case. The PS5 came out in 2020, 7 years after the release of the PS4, and the PS4 was still getting major titles all the way till the end of 2023 with games like Elden Ring, Resident Evil Village, Gran Turismo 7, and most major indie games. Even in 2025, the PS4 is still getting some games from third parties and indie games 12 years into its life. On the Nintendo side of things, the Switch 1 is 8 years old, but a ton of games this year came out on the Switch 1, even though the Switch 2 just came out. It got most big indie hits, some major first-party Nintendo games like Pokemon ZA and Metroid Prime 4, and a handful of third-party AAA games such as Sonic Cross-World Racing and Final Fantasy Tactics. Because publishers are trying to reach the widest possible audience, live service games can still largely be played on old hardware, and in many ways, graphics tech has plateaued. Older consoles are just generally lasting longer than they traditionally have. Just because the new console is out doesn't mean your old one suddenly turns into a pumpkin or explodes. On the PC end of things, it's very similar. Early on in the life of GPUs in the late 90s, or graphics accelerators as they were called back then,
which was the style at the time,
and in the 90s and in the early 2000s, you had a reason to upgrade every 2 to 3 years to play the latest and greatest games at decent frame rates and higher resolutions. By the early 2010s, that was every 3 to 5 years, and now depending on what you are playing on and what settings you're willing to put up with, you can have a GPU that lasts 7 to 9 years and still be playing games at 60 FPS. Now let's go take a look at what you need to run some gorgeous AAA games at minimum and recommended settings. For Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, you can play the game at minimum settings with a 2060 Super, a 6-year-old GPU. And for recommended, a 3080 Ti, an almost 5-year-old GPU. And that is one of the best looking games of this current generation. Mafia the Old Country, another looker, has slightly higher minimum requirements with a 2070, but recommends the same 3080 Ti. And those are very graphically intense story-based games. If you're a fan of multiplayer games, indie games, or esports titles, you can get away with hardware that's even lower spec or older. Battlefield 6 is one of the biggest games of 2025 and asks for a base 2060 on the low end and a 3060 Ti for recommended settings. Arc Raiders, another darling multiplayer game from this past year, can be run on a 1050 Ti, a 9-year-old GPU, and recommends a 2070, a 7-year-old GPU. Even poorly optimized, bloated pieces of crap like Borderlands 4 recommends just a regular 3080, which, once again, is 5 years old. As for indie games, most of them run well on GPUs that are at least 5 years old, and in many cases, far older. Expedition 33 recommends a 3060 Ti. Ball Pit, a 1060, again, a 9-year-old GPU. And my personal favorite, Balatro, can basically run on a computer that can display graphics and run Windows 10. Now, I realize how far this goes depends on your needs in regards to resolution and frame rate. If you're the kind of person who needs everything at ultra, at native 4K, while playing cinematic open world games with 30 million mods, then yes, these older GPUs are not going to cut it for you. But I'm betting that's not the case for the vast majority of people, because according to the Steam hardware survey, over 75% of Steam users are playing games at 1440p or lower, and only 5% are gaming at 4K or higher resolutions. Not only that, most games on medium settings look pretty good nowadays, easily comparable to their PS5 counterparts, but with higher frame rates. It's not like the mid-2000s where turning down the draw distance meant turning whatever game you were playing into Silent Hill, or making it look good would turn the game into a slideshow if you had an older GPU. Just like on consoles, publishers on PC are trying to reach the widest possible audience. Live service games are the most popular games in the industry and still work on old hardware, and graphics tech has mostly plateaued with rare exceptions. Meaning that just like how consoles are lasting longer than ever, PC hardware is also lasting longer than ever. When it comes to gaming hardware today, you generally are just getting more use for your dollar, just like when it comes to software. You are getting more game for your dollar. Speaking of getting more games for your dollar, though, one thing I think people really underestimate today is how often video games are on sale. Back in the 90s and early 2000s, games were only on sale if they were more than 2 years old, way overstocked at a retailer, and then sometimes during Black Friday and post-Christmas there would be a sale. Otherwise, it was full price, all day, every day. But then, in the late 2000s, our Lord and Savior Gaben came down from his throne and delivered us a miracle.
Are you ready for a miracle? Are you ready for a miracle? Set you free. Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready?
Are you ready for a miracle? Are you ready for a miracle?
This Steam sale. Every season, Steam does a huge sale where some of the newest games will be up to 50% off. During the most recent Steam Winter Sale, Ninja Gaiden 4 was only 2 months old, and it was 20% off. Oblivion, the remaster, 7 months old, and it was 33% off. Doom: The Dark Ages was only 6 months old, and it was 50% off. During one of these major sales, most games on Steam are on sale from anywhere from, 20% off to 90% off. Hogwarts Legacy is normally a $70 game, but during the most recent winter Steam sale, it was $6. This is to say nothing of smaller sales that happen through the year and publisher-specific sales. These are happening almost every single week. Genre-specific sales. All the time, Steam has a bunch of great games on sale for little to no money. And while not as often or as aggressive as Steam, the Epic Game Store also runs sales that will just give away free games. Now I hear you say, I am on console. I don't have anything like this. To which I would say that digital sales do exist on console platforms. While not as frequent as Steam sales, Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo all have sales multiple times a year for games released as recently as 6 to 12 months ago. Even the notoriously stingy Nintendo has great first-party Nintendo games for sale about twice a year, with bigger ones happening during the week of Thanksgiving. And going forward, Nintendo's digital games on the Switch 2 will be $10 cheaper than their physical version. And if you somehow still can't afford any games with all these sales happening, then why not join one of the very affordable game subscription services? While the days of Blockbuster and Hollywood Video are long gone, renting is still alive and well. Did you know GameFly still exists? Yeah, this was news to me as well. But for $20 to $35 a month, you can rent anywhere from 1 to 3 games or movies at a time, which does include the newest releases. If you want to buy those games and movies, you also get them at a steep discount, and they'll mail you the case and manual. And all the current and many past systems are supported on GameFly. If you're not a fan of physical games then, well, Game Pass Ultimate is $23 a month, with many new releases every month and hundreds of older titles to play. If you don't own an Xbox, well, you can get most of the same games, including those same new releases, for $14 a month with the PC Game Pass. For PlayStation owners, there's a library of PlayStation games on PSN for $18 a month through PSN Plus Premium. And while the big AAA stuff normally doesn't hit for 12 to 18 months after their release, there's still a ton of games to choose from, and some indies do hit PlayStation Plus Premium on day one. Now, if you're into older games, or just on an even lower budget, the Switch and Switch 2 for $50 a year has one of the biggest and best catalogs of retro titles available, covering many of the best games on the NES all the way up to the GameCube. Now, let's say you don't own a console. Or you want to actually own the games in your subscription service? Well, there is a service for you. It is called the Humble Choice Bundle. For $15 a month, it gives you 8 to 10 games a month for Steam to keep, with most of them being relatively high-profile games like Another Craft's Treasure, Atomic Heart, No More Heroes 3, V Rising, and a lot more. The best part is, if you don't want the games, then great, just gift code them to a friend or sell them. With any of these services, you can play tons of games every month for not even half the price of one AAA game. Between these sales and these subscription services, there is no reason you can't be playing a ton of games year-round for well under the normal $70. Now, with all that said, you probably do have one big question, which, let's get into that. Between the more frequent sales, games being longer, hardware lasting longer, games really do offer more value than ever before. But I know what you're asking. Why doesn't it feel that way? Well, the most obvious thing I can tell you is cost of living. As you saw in the graph during the start of the video, inflation over the past 3 years has been crazy. And while video game software has been largely unaffected by this, and has been flat for the most part for 30 years, your expenses probably didn't stay flat at all. Rent, food, transportation are all up because of many unfortunate world events coinciding all at once over the past couple years, which means that every little thing outside of those essentials feels more expensive. So when your escape from all this bullshit is video games, and they get more expensive, that feels so unbelievably shitty. And while an extra $10 in a vacuum isn't a big deal, if everything else gets $10 more expensive, suddenly an extra $10 for a video game is an exceptionally big deal, especially if you are buying more than one at a time. What used to be 2 AAA games for $120 is currently $140, and realistically will probably go to $160 within the next year or two. None of this feels good regardless if all the facts say one thing, which is games are cheaper and a better value than ever. Your emotions are saying something different when it comes to the expense and value of this hobby. But my hope is that this video provided you with some good information, and maybe some optimism, and it shows how things aren't all bad when it comes to the affordability and value of current day video games, and a belief that things are going to be alright. There's a lot of options to play games for no money, or very little money. AA and indie titles keep their price points well below $70 to $80, and generally being higher quality than what most of AAA has to offer. Hardware is hanging around a lot longer, and with graphical leaps being smaller and smaller, there is less of a need to upgrade your PC, and the current crop of consoles all have plenty of life in them, not to mention a giant backlog of games most of you probably haven't even scratched the surface on yet. And if you have a PC, and the worst comes to worst, there is always the option of emulation, or getting your games through what I'll call alternative means.
Do what you want, 'cause a pirate is free. You are a pirate. You're our favorite indeed. Being a pirate is our right to be. Do what you want, 'cause a pirate is free. You are a pirate.
Hey everybody, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed any part of this, please give us a sub or like or comment. It helps us get out in the world and people saying our stuff. And maybe you'll watch my video on Xbox, or Anthony's new streamer review, or that sick video Duncan did on Chinese cultivation games. Hopefully we'll be getting more stuff out a lot sooner here, and we love you, and thanks for staying along with us. Bye.